Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar, Caravans of Gold, Fragments in Time, at the National Museum of African Art. I am Pierre Pennick, Education Curator at the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C. This program is made possible by the National Museum of African Art and by a Title VI grant from the United States Department of Education, which is funding national resource centers on Africa at Howard University and on the Middle East at Georgetown University, and by the support from the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown. Joining me today are Brenda Randolph, President of Africa Access and Outreach Director at the Center for African Studies, Howard University. Dr. Vanessa Oyuji, Assistant Outreach Director at the Center for African Studies, Howard University. Dr. Susan Douglas, K-14 Education Outreach Coordinator at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, Georgetown University. We are pleased to have our keynote speaker today, Dr. Khalida Sese, Assistant Teaching Professor, Center for African Studies at Georgetown University. Dr. Sese holds bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Nouakchott, Mauritania, and the University of Cheikh Anta Diop, Senegal. He also attained a master's degree from Bowling Green State University in Ohio, while on Fulbright Foreign Student Program Fellowship. He attained his doctorate in African history at Indiana University, Bloomington, where he explored African American and African diaspora studies, as well as global studies of slavery. Full bios of all of our panelists are in the teacher resource folder, to which we have given all participants access. It's linked on the agenda, which we will place in the chat for your access during our interactive segment of this webinar. But first, we will begin with a short tour of the Caravans of Gold, Fragments in Time exhibit at the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C. Here is our website. So welcome to our website. By pressing africa.si.edu, you will be able to pull up our website. Our newest exhibit, Caravans of Gold, Fragments in Time, can be found under current exhibits. Once you click on it, you can click on Caravans of Gold, and it will take you to this page directly. The exhibit page is set up in 7 different thematic sections: Caravans of Gold, Saharan Echoes, Driving Desires, Gold and Salt, The Long Reach of the Sahara, Archaeological Imagination Station, giving context to fragments, Saharan Frontiers, Shifting Away from the Sahara, and a wonderful teaching guide, Compliments of Books Museum. Rock Museum Teacher's Guide. So what I'm doing is I'm going to click on a few of the themes to get you orientated in this page. The first one I've clicked on is Saharan Echoes. As you can see, if you scroll down, you'll see fragments of material, jewelry, woodworks, sources and artworks that are utilized. Under each object, if you click on each object, you'll see a full museum label and the object. I'm going to go into Driving Desires, Gold and Salt. As I click on that and scroll down, you'll see a little introduction on Mediterranean and Sahara Seas of Gold. You'll see objects such as coins, fragments, fabric, language. And as you click on each object, you'll see a complete and full museum label for your research and other resources. I'd also like to share the teacher's guide with you. Compliments of the Block Museum. And as you scroll down, this is available in PDF. You can download it and use it for your classes, and you can also share. This will be available on our website underneath the exhibit, Caravans of Gold. I just want to show you the teacher's website. If you go to the upper hand corner and you click on the arrow, it will take you through each page, the contents, the age, why teach with Caravans of Gold. It'll explain to you about the guide. Of course, it will offer further resources. And then it will start with the pre-activities. With our website and the teacher guide, you have what you need to research and to write and explore more on this exhibit. This companion is necessary for most teachers and even for college students. It's very thorough, 39 pages, complete, and all art selections can be accessed on our website. So I'm going back to the actual page of Caravans of Gold, and I want to go back to exhibits. And so when you pull up the exhibit, I just want to go over that this is what you'll see. And if you click on current exhibits here, it will take you to Caravans of Gold. And then when you click on Caravans of Gold, you'll see the main page of the exhibit. I would like to thank all of you for coming. And now I am pleased to announce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Khalid Assese, Assistant Teaching Professor, the Center for African Studies at Georgetown University. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you permit me to call you by your first name, Pierre.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
You're
Pierre,
welcome.
Brenda, Suzanne, Vanessa, thank you all for involving me in this. I am really excited and honored to be joining you in this very important endeavor. I would like also to thank all the sponsors, the Smithsonian of National Museums of African Arts, the Center of African Studies at Howard, the Center for Contemporary Studies at Georgetown University. And I also would like to thank all the participants for taking the time and really being here. Like I said, I'm really thrilled to join you and share my insights about Islam, African Islam, and also about the trans-Saharan trade. And I really look forward to your questions and comments at the end of my talk. This is the outline that would give you a sense about, the structure and the layout of my talk and give you a sense about what I want to talk about today. Starting with source of information, I think as an African historian, it's important to talk about sources and the nature of sources that as a scholar of Africa that we do and use to write about, to construct about history about the continent, and in this case, the trans-Saharan trade. So what we know and how do we know, how we know it. So that first thing. The second, I talk a little bit about the early crossing of the trans-Saharan trade, and then move on, talk about the expansion of the trade. And that will be really the focus of my talk, about the medieval era and the nature of that era and how that era looked in West Africa. Then I'll talk, related to that, I talk about imperial era in West Africa, and I'm talking about the three empires of gold, what scholars call the three empires of gold. That's the empire of Ghana, that's ancient Ghana, then the empire of Mali, and the empire of Songhai. And then I'll talk a little bit about the caravan cities and the nature of those cities that emerged and thrived because of the trade. And then lastly, I'll talk about the Africanization of Islam, or the indigenization of Islam. and how African adopted Islam and appropriated it and made it their own, and then uh, um, questions and comment at the end. Okay, where we have, okay, let's see. All right, good. Okay, what we know Africa this time, medieval West Africa, was an important trading powerhouse. It's played a central role in the global economy. So this is really important for us as educators and as teachers to uh, help our students to see the global context of African history, and to see the importance of using a global approach to understand African societies and African history. And why that is important, because there is always a tendency that Africa is isolated, especially we're talking about the Sahara as a place that is isolated, that is remote, that is a barrier. That's fiction. That's far away from the truth. And scholars over the last decades have really done fantastic work that shows that Africa has, the Sahara has been very vibrant and dynamic. It's been a place of global trade, a place of cross-cultural exchange, and a place of where trade brought diverse people, diverse ideas, diverse cultures, diverse civilization together. And this is really important because, we have the tendency to talk, like I said, about the globalization in the context of North America, and especially starting with the Christopher Columbus uh, um, in uh, in 1492, where his travel brought the different people together. But globalization, African have been globalizing for 1,000 years before even Christopher Columbus came to the New World, and it's been and it's been like that, and it's still like that, so that's very important. This trade also led to the explosion of Islamic learning and development of cities, and these cities became institutions of learning and institutions of Islamic productions. And I'll talk a little bit about those cities later. Now, talking about the evidence for constructing history, the history of trans-Saharan trade, there is always a tendency to look at African, to talk about African orality, and to talk about African as only African history is only based on oral sources. Oral sources is a very important methodology, but it's not exhaustive when we're talking about African history and writing about constructing really, if we want to really construct an accurate, honest representation of Muslim societies, and in this case, the Sahara and trans-Saharan trade. We have to take into account archaeology. We have to take into account written accounts that were written by medieval Arab and Berber. The Amazigh. Amazigh is actually the right term for referring to Berber, because Berber is a problematic construct, and I could talk more about that later in the Q&A. The chronicles written by sub-Saharan African scholars, the Ajami literature, which is now scholars are going back and talking about the importance of records of African languages written with using Arabic scripts. There is vast literature that exists that scholars are just beginning to use and look at this Ajami literature. Colonial documents, reports, collections that are found in family libraries, manuscripts, all of that is important. And again, and an oral traditions are part of this. So this is what I use to construct this history about the long durée of trans-Saharan trade, and show that actually Africa has been a global, the Sahara and West Africa has been really this global hub of trade and a place for encounters of different civilizations and cultures. Okay, so the early crossings that I mentioned that I want to talk about is uh, what, Herodotus in his book, the Greek intellectual, famous Greek intellectual historian writer, provide us some of the details, earliest details about, the trading activities that were happening, dating back to the period from 500 BC and 700 AD. And this is really what he talks about. He talks about the very great nation. He refers to the Garamentes. The Garamentes are the people that now you found that were in the area of what is now the country of Libya and Algeria in North Africa. And these are the peoples, even in Mauritania, present day Mauritania, there are peoples, for instance, the Haratin communities who often are portrayed as, as a community of slaves and former slaves. Some of them trace their genealogy. Some historians trace their genealogy to the Garamentes. These, groups that were very powerful at some points of time, and they were defeated, and some of them were taken as captives. What is really relevant for us for the Garamentes are the earliest people who practiced long distance trade. They were really specializing in long distance trade, and they relied on the horse-drawn chariots. And they created what is even those trade routes that existed around the time. They were called the chariot routes. And as you see here in this painting, it shows you how the Garamentes, actually the one who introduced the chariot route to the region, North Africa, and they were trading with towns in Bilad Sudan. The Bilad Sudan is the phrase that medieval Arab writers and geographers and scholars used to refer to the land of south of the Sahara, what is now West Africa. They used to refer to it Bilad Sudan. It's the phrase in Arabic, it means the land of the black. That's what it means. So these Garamentes in what is now Algeria and Libya, they were trading with the people south of the Sahara and trading, and this led to the emergence of different towns like Jene, the old Jene, and Gao. But this is really important because it shows you that the trade existed before the arrival of Islam, because there is a tendency to focus, especially when we're talking about the medieval period, which is really the period that the trade thrived and become really important. But trading existed before the arrival of Muslims and the Arabs. It existed with the Amazigh and the Sub-Saharan Africans. They were doing trade that goes back to the time of the Carthaginian. And this map here shows you the Garamentes. The circle here where you see the Garamenta and you see ancient Ghana, where all these areas that were inhabited by the Garamentes. Other groups that were specialized also in long distance trading, the Wangara, this is the Mandinke, sometimes referred to them, there are different names, labels, known as Mandinke, Mandingo, Malinke, all of these referring to this, the Wangara. And the Wangaras would play a very important role, especially in ancient Ghana. And then you have the Masuva and Lamtuna. They were also, the Masuva and Lamtuna, these are Amazigh confederations, and that they were also specialized in long distance trade. You have also Jewish traders in North Africa that they were also active in the trans-Saharan trade. Also, trade was not only it was only women, it was not only man specialty. Women also engaged in long distance trade. Saharan women engaged in long distance trade. They were merchants, female traders, female scholars. That's important to highlight. And this is something that Ibn Battuta, when he came to Mali and came to Walata, I'll talk a little bit later about those, is he referred to he talked about the kind of liberty and freedom that existed around the household, and talked about the women as being, um, as he talks about their power and their agency that existed in Amazigh societies in pre-Islamic period. You also have other groups that later came in and became specialized in the law, in the trade. And this is mostly in the 19th century, 18th century, 19th century, is the Tikna. Also, Awlad Bisba. These are important confederations that practiced trade, and still today, some of the Tikna and Awlad Bisba, when you travel in the region, you find them are still practice trade. They are specialized in commerce, and they are known for that. Like I mentioned, archaeological evidence shows us that this exchange has been happening before the Islamic era. And there was this trade routes that linked North African regions with markets such as Jenejene and Tadmek. Tadmek is also known as a souk. Souk in Arabic is an Arabic phrase referring to markets. So that shows you also that the place was very important place for commerce and trade. Different trade items were brought there, including silk, including spices, including salts, and gold definitely was taken from, sub-Saharan Africa going to North Africa and other parts of the Mediterranean. These are the trade routes. The map here shows you the different routes. Three main routes were very known, that the eastern route that connected present-day Libya and Tunisia to Central Sudan market. And you have the western route that from northwestern Algeria through present-day Mauritania, ending in the Niger River bend. And then you have the third route that linked eastern Sudan to Egypt. So these are the different routes that, camel later, I'll talk a little bit about camel and the role of the camel, what is become known as Tawafil al-Sahra in Arabic, meaning the camel caravans were going through these different routes. And here, this map shows you the different routes also, but it gives you the different trading items. I talked already about salt, gold, but also slaves were being taken from sub-Saharan Africa going to North Africa, but there was also slaves that were being taken from North Africa going to sub-Saharan Africa. So that's important to keep in mind, that slaves were coming, going in both ways. Gold, salt, other items also were traded and going from different parts of the, from the south going to the north, and items coming from the north going to the south. Two important developments that led to the expansion of the trade. Really, that made it this global hub that we are really talking about is, number one, the spread of Islam. So after the Islamizations of North Africa, the religion Islam started to spread to Western Africa, and Islam spread first to the West Niger Band in Senegambia, in Mali, in Chad. The first sub-Saharan African rulers, according to historical document, that accepted Islam was the king of Takrur. So Takrur became this place of the cradle of Islamic civilization in West Africa. And the name of the ruler is Warajib ibn Rabis. He was the first to convert to Islam. And this is really important. It's interesting that scholars like the late Suleiman Young talk about this, is that, and scholars like Usman Khan at Harvard University talk about that, this is really important dimension about the conversion of Islam that happened in Africa, that the rulers were the first to accept Islam. The kings were the first to accept Islam. And they were not accepting Islam because Islam made sense to them. They accepting Islam because Islam gave them access to other civilizations. Islam gave them access to different trade routes. Islam, they were practical. They were practical reasons. Of course, they were theological reasons, but they were also very practical and pragmatic about accepting Islam. So by 17th century, Islam had direct contact almost in every part of West Africa. So Islam brought a new language, new system of writings, which is Arabic. And I'll talk about it, especially when we talk about the Ajami literature. It also brought new ideas, new legal law system, brought papers. It also led to the growth of camels, because the Arabs were specialized in camels, especially the dromedarian camels, the Arabian camel. And this is even mentioned in the Quran. In the Quran talks about this, in Surah Quraysh. There is one chapter in the Quran that is called the chapter of Quraysh. Quraysh is the Arabian, is the tribe that the Prophet is from, the tribe of Quraysh, that was dominant in pre-Islamic Arabia. Quraysh was the dominant tribe in Mecca. And the Quran talks about this in this chapter talks about this journey that happens in winter and summer. Called the Quran mentioned it in this surah that is called Quraysh. The journey of winter and summer. So they were and these journeys happened, they were using camels. So when they came to North Africa, they brought that skills with them. And that helped with the expansion of the trade. They brought like I mentioned, the dromedary camel, or the one single humpback camel. And the camel, why the camel becomes very important? Because the camel, of its ability, its endurance, and its ability to go days without food and water, and becomes known as the sheep of the deserts. Because it's really the camel that revolutionized the trans-Saharan trade with Islam. Because the camel allowed communities, now the Sahara, people were crisscrossing, but very few communities settled in the Sahara. With the camel, people are able to reside in the Sahara Desert. People are able to, that led to the emergence of new settlements and communities and towns that later will become towns of Islamic learning, towns like Walata, Sijil Masa, Tishit, Wadan, and others that would emerge and become these important centers. The development, also with the camel, people are now able to carry more merchandise, more goods. The volume increases, the volume of salt, gold, slaves, all items, nuts, Arabic gum, all of that increased because of the camel. And there were two types of camels that I want to talk about. There were two types of caravans, camel caravaning that's happening. One, and this is Ibn Hawqal talks about this in two types of the camel caravans. One is called the large camel caravan that is organized annually and involved thousands of camels and hundreds of men, and it was multi-directional. And the second one is a small camel caravan, and this is typically less than 100 animals and a smaller group of men. This is a time, like I mentioned, is of the great Saharan connectivity. And anthropologist Judith Sheila talks about this in her book, Smugglers and Saints of the Sahara, where she argues that Sahara is best understood by its extensive network of connectivity and long-standing mobility. And she talks about the Saharan economy of oasis agriculture that acted as a trading hub that connected wide network of people. So that one perspective by Judith Sheila. The other perspective by Gillan Lydon, historian Gillan Lydon at UCLA, that she talks about the legal institutions and how legal institutions developed and allowed, you know, merchants who were most of the time scholars that were regulating dispute and offering services. So this is led to the network of legal authorities across the different settlements of the Sahara. Now I'll talk a little bit about the three empires of gold that I mentioned earlier. And in the map, you see them. You see the empire of Ghana and Songhai and Mali. This is the three empires that thrived because of the trans-Saharan trade. They thrived because they were able to, control the trade routes, and they were able to offer protections. Remember, the Sahara Desert is the biggest desert in the world. It's a very vast desert. There are always people who are known as the Arabic word for them is the cutters of the road. People who, practice high robbery, and people who are, trying to, kidnap people. And that's why you have a lot of slaves, because people were kidnapping people and people were taking people as captives, and all of that was happening, the insecurity. And these empires were able to provide security, and they also taxed the caravans. So that's where the riches, they started to have, the wealth comes in. You have the ancient Ghana. Ancient Ghana, you have the, archaeologists were able to talk about, the evidence that we have from archaeology and Arabic accounts talks about two towns. The towns that were, Muslims towns that were with, that existed within ancient Ghana. And these usually Muslim towns that are, that usually foreign traders, but you also have some locals who started to convert to Islam. Remember, the kingdom of Takrur coexisted with the ancient of Ghana. So the ruler of Takrur, when he converted, people start to convert to Islam, and that led to some the increase of converts. Also, the ancient Ghana is known as, as Wagadu, sorry. That's also the Soninke name for ancient Ghana. Sorry. How did ancient Ghana, there are theories about how the Ghana was defeated. There is Arabic account that Al-Muravid movement that came from North Africa, Al-Murabitun, the Arabic name for them, that were able to defeat ancient Ghana. There are scholars who dispute that and argue that ancient Ghana, declined because of internal decay and internal conflicts and problems. According to Wagadu oral account, it's attributed to the rain. The rain stopped falling, and religious tradition neglected the gods, and ancestors took revenge, and that led to the collapse of ancient Ghana. I can talk more about that later. You also have the empire that came after Ghana is the empire of Mali. And this is really, empire of Mali is really the time when West African riches, Africa rich, it's really the highest opulence. And it becomes really the time that the trade thrived in West Africa. And it was founded by Sundiata, known as the Lion King. And Ibn Battuta described Mali as the most powerful kingdom in Bilad Sudan, the land of the blacks. Ibn Khaldun, sorry. And Ibn Battuta also visited it in Mali in the 14th century, and he talks about the Islamic learning. He talks about kids memorizing the Quran. Talks about the practices of Islamic schooling in Mali and the nature of that schooling. We also know that the Empire of Mali is very famous because of Mansa Musa, and he's traveled to, when he went on pilgrimage, he went to Mecca in 1324, where he distributed so much gold, and he took with him hundreds and hundreds of slaves on large caravans. This is the map that gives you a sense of the routes that he took, the different routes that Mansa Musa in his route to Mecca. Now, the successor of Mali is the Songhai, the dynasty of the Songhai peoples. And again, like Mali, like ancient Ghana, they were able to thrive and become very prosperous because of the trans-Saharan gold trade. And the famous, one of the famous Songhai, Songhai became very famous because also of the scholars, the Askia Muhammad, the famous ruler of Songhai, invested so much in Islamic learning. And this is really the time when places like Timbuktu become really a hub for Islamic institution and Islamic learning. And really when, and that's really, really important, the time where you have Timbuktu, a place not only for sub-Saharan African scholars, but it's a place of multicultural. It became a cosmopolitan, a place of multi-ethnic, multiracial. It's a place for different groups, Amazigh, sub-Saharans, Arabs coming together and creating this interesting place. This is the gives you a sense of the cities that emerged, and this is the cities that thrived because of the trans-Saharan trade. And you can see some of the famous cities in the north. You have Sijil Masa. Sijil Masa become really, really an important place, and especially during the time of Al-Murabitun and later Al-Muwahhidun, who controlled it. Once they controlled it, they were able to move to control the trans-Saharan trade and also move to Spain. You have places like Odakost, you have Wadan, and you have also on the map here, you see the Jil. Jil is the mine where salt were coming from the Sahara. Salt was really an important commodity that came from the Sahara and was transported to sub-Saharan Africa, because salt, as we know, at the time there was no such refrigeration. So that the refrigeration, salt was the refrigeration in medieval time, and a lot of sub-Saharan needed salt, and the salt was coming from the Sahara. At the same time, gold was coming from sub-Saharan Africa, going to North Africa and other places. An important city that I want to talk about is Shingiti. And Shingiti is in the present-day Mauritania. It was known as the intellectual capital of the region. Before Shingiti, there was cities like Tishit, Wadan, but Shingiti has really become this intellectual hub. Usman Khan, wrote this book called Beyond Timbuktu. And what he argues in that book is trying to encourage us to not look only at Timbuktu and look at cities that emerged and thrived that are beyond just Timbuktu. We all know about the history of Timbuktu, but we need to look really beyond Timbuktu and look at places like Shingiti and the global role that it played, the role that it played in global trade, but also in the in the global Islam. We look at Walata, we look at Tadmak, we look at other places that are. So Shingiti is become, even today, Mauritania is known as the land of Shinqit, which is Bilad Shinqit, referring to the town, because the town defined the whole region at some point. And especially during the 19th century, where the town became known as a place where caravans that were going on the Hajj, going to pilgrimage to Mecca, departed from that place. And people who went to Mecca, places, or went to the Middle East, went to, not to Al-Hijaz, went to Cairo, went to other places, they became known as Shanaqita, referring to the place Shanqit. So that even today, it's stuck with Mauritania, that they refer to it as a Shanaqita, coming from this era. The other place, of course, that we know about is Timbuktu. Timbuktu was founded as a Tuareg camp, and during the Mansa Musa time, it thrived because Mansa Musa supported Muslim scholars, he supported schools, he supported mosques, he invested a lot in Islamic learning and Islamic manuscript. And this is the time when the city became known for its rich libraries and manuscripts. Like I mentioned, education in Timbuktu is also very distinctive because it became this multiracial, multi-ethnic. Scholars who are Amazigh, who are Africans, were all coming to Timbuktu. Also, education also is very distinct because of the way it was not only about schools. We often talk about the Sankore Mosque in Timbuktu, but education became really tied to communities, these extended families and extended lineages that became specialized in Islamic learning and Islamic education. So, and this group, when they move around the town and move around the regions, they move, these groups who are become really known for, who become in charge of education in places like Timbuktu and other places. This is from a drawing of Timbuktu from René Caillé. René Caillé was the first French to reach Timbuktu and come back alive. There were Europeans, Westerners, who came to Timbuktu, but they did not come back. He was the first to come and reach Timbuktu and come back with description of the city and the town. Of course, there are problems with some of those descriptions, but also this description that his writing provide interesting insights about the city. And this it shows you the town, the layout of the town. It shows you the houses, it shows you the mosques. It shows you, it gives you a sense of how Timbuktu looked in the 19th century. Now I want to move and talk about Islamic architecture, about the Africanization of Islam. And I really want to focus here on two aspects. One is Islamic architecture that is very distinct to Africa, but also focus on the literacy. And you could see here, this is the mosque. This is the Sankore Mosque. Timbuktu is and sometimes it's referred to as the university, Sankore University, as the oldest university in sub-Saharan Africa. Kwame Nkrumah, in his inaugural speech at the independence of Ghana, he talks about the Sankore, he talks about Timbuktu, he talks about the town of Walata, sorry. So this is the mosque, and if really look, it's very different because this is a mosque that is made with mud, and you see the woods in the mosque. This is the second picture here is inside the mosques, so it gives you a sense, and then you have the third picture that gives you also a sense of how the mosque looked, and it's very different from let's say a Middle Eastern mosque. This is from the town of Walata. I just mentioned Walata. It's often portrayed as a sister city of Timbuktu. Walata also was a place of a cosmopolitan place. And no, sorry, this is Shinqit. This is the mosque in Shinqit, which is made with, as you see, with stone. So it's very different from the one in Timbuktu. This is made with stones, and you see the houses are very different. It's a different kind of architecture. This is the mosque in Lara Banga in Ghana, in northern Ghana. So it also gives you a different flavor about the architecture, the different architectures that exist in Muslim societies, in African Muslim societies. This is what I was talking about. This is the houses in Walata. And this is the traditional wall art on houses in Walata. When you go to, this is only unique in Walata. Does not exist in other places. And you see the houses, the doors, and see the wall are decorated. And this is attributed, this is, according to a historian, this is something that was imported from the Andalusia, from Spain. After the Al-Muravid conquest, people who came from Spain and moved it to Walata, they brought this architecture with them. And it's very distinct, and it's still practiced today. Of course, it has evolved, and people have modified it, and it's only the specialty of women, and women from the category of known in the Sahara as al-Mu'allimin. This is a blacksmith caste who are specialized in doing this kind of arts. And they do it on houses, they do it on mosques, and nowadays it become a profession for them, where they do it for, even if you go to contemporary, you go to places, big cities in the Sahara, in Mauritania, you see them. But in other places, if you go to other places, even in Senegal, you see people go to use the same decorations. Now I want to talk about literacy, and talk quickly about the importance of education, the Saharan traditions of schooling. The tradition of schooling tradition of schooling that existed. This is a school. This is very unique to African societies, and this really the tradition that is based on a lawh. It's a wooden writing board, and it has existed for a very, very long time, and it's still practiced today. It's existed for thousands of years, and it's not only unique to the Saharan communities. It's also in other places, like in Senegal. You still have today. In Mauritania, this setting is called the mahdara. But in Senegal, you have it, the Wolof, use the term dara for it, which comes from Arabic word Darul Quran, the house of Quran. But you have it in other places. And I can talk more about it later. What is distinct about the Saharan system of education is they call it higher education under the tent. And what's really important that we need to keep in mind here, two things or three things. One is the role of the verse. The Saharan Mauritania is known as the land of 1 million poets, as I mentioned already. So verse was very important for memorizing texts, memorizing scholarly texts. Also, it's important, like I mentioned already, the role of women. Women were scholars. There were female scholars who contributed to production of knowledge. You have also the tradition of taqrib. the expatriation. And this tradition of taqrib was really important. When a student reaches a certain level, they go abroad. So they travel to a different town. They go to Timbuktu, or they go to Walata, or they go to Shanqit, or they go to another important place where they could learn more about Islam. You also have the Ajami literature. And this is my last point. I think I'm running out of time. The Ajami literature is also is very important tradition that has existed and that has allowed people to allowed sub-Saharan Africans also to produce knowledge, and it's an important literature that was produced in different African languages. So you have Ajami in Hausa, you have it in Wolof, you have it in Songhai, you have it in different languages that was produced for thousands of years. And it's very important to keep that in mind when we're talking about the Africanization of Islam and the practices that existed over thousands of years in West Africa. I think the other point that I want to talk about is the libraries, the nature of rich libraries that existed. These are known, we know about, we've heard about the libraries that existed in Timbuktu. But again, like I said, there are other centers. It is reported that there are about 6,000 rare books and manuscripts, including the oldest Quranic text in existence in the town of Shanqit. So that's and this is just here, it shows you this is a handwritten Quranic text written by the locals, and it gives you a sense of the kind of tradition, scholarly tradition that existed in the region. This is the end. I think I exhausted my time. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Asese. We have one question for you. The person asked if you could talk about the role of donkeys in the trade. Were they crucial to the trade prior to the widespread use of the camel?
The donkey, yes. So the donkeys were absolutely used, and also horses, and used during the time that I mentioned, especially the time of the Caravans. They were used, but you know they had some limitations on them, because the Sahara is a very difficult place to cross, and the donkey is really and horses were not really made for that kind of long distance traveling, and also carrying a lot of goods and a lot of merchandise. So they were widely used, but people used them. But once the camel, and at the same time, and then I need to mention this, probably I did not clarify it in my presentation, is the camel was used. The Romans used the camel, but they were not nomadic people like the Arabs. They did not know it. It's only with the arrival of the Arabs, who were specialized, like I mentioned, there were people who were doing this long distance traveling in Arabia, who really used it skillfully and strategically, and the camel become really, like I mentioned, the sheep of the desert. So yeah, they were used, but there were some limitations.
Thank you. Our next question is, what primary sources, material and or textual, for these histories do you find to be accessible to undergraduate students? This particular person has used excerpts from Ibn Khaldun, Ibn Battuta, and Sundiata, but would love to broaden the use of primary sources.
So that's a good question. I think this is where it comes, the Ajami literature. The challenge with Ajami literature, of course, is the translation, because there haven't been a lot of translation that has been done about Ajami literature. But scholars are now doing that kind of work. Falun Gong and, at Boston University, the Senegalese anthropologist who has done really fantastic work on Ajami literature. But there are others. So Ajami literature is one of them. There are, Arabic manuscripts that has been translated and collection of books, interesting primary sources in Arabic beyond Ibn Khaldun and Battuta and Ibn al-Hawqal and those famous ones. There are others. And there are also manuscripts, primary sources that were produced by, like I mentioned, African scholars in Nigeria, in beyond, Timbuktu, beyond Mali, in Nigeria, in Niger, in Senegal. There's also the Murid, when it depends really on what you're really looking at and the topic that you're really looking at. There is a vast of, primary sources that you could use. For example, if you were thinking about Sufism, teaching about Sufism and the practices, Sufi practices in West Africa, I would recommend, Murid literature that has been translated, that gives you really interesting perspective about the distinct nature of, Sufi practices in West Africa. So there is a lot, and it depends on what you're really looking at and what you want to focus on.
Thank you. This next question, I believe you pretty much answered. It was, do you have suggested resources for pre-Islamic educational sites? And I'm not sure with what you talked about if that is inclusive in that.
Yeah, so I would say, pre-Islamic period, mostly, I would say oral traditions, looking at songs. So for example, like the, Sunjata, the story of Sunjata, we know about it because of, the griot in Mali. It's been the story that has been passed from generation to one generation to another generation. So I would say oral sources, songs, proverbs, but also archaeological evidence. So archaeological evidence, botany also provides, interesting, and also linguistic evidence, linguistic sources that also provides, important insight about the pre-Islamic era, of West Africa. And I could put a list of sources and share it with you,
Thank you. And this is the last question. The question is it possible for the mosque in present-day Ghana to date to the 8th century?
The mosque in present-day Ghana, that's a very interesting question, because the mosque in present-day Ghana, there are a lot of theories that are being thrown around about when it was established, when it was founded, who founded it. There are stories about a saint who traveled, or an Islamic scholar who traveled from Mecca, from Arabia, and came to Ghana and established the mosque. But really, the document that I've been able to look at is it was established probably around the 13th century, and there are other versions, there are other sources that say would establish it in the 17th century, but not really. I haven't seen anything about 8th century, really. But that's what I know so far. But there are different theories about when it was established and who established that mosque.
Okay, thank you. And we actually have time for one more question, and I think this one is pretty interesting. Is the role of women as scholars unique or particular to Africa? Is this similarly due to the prevalence of matriarchal, matrilineal social structure before the spread of Islam in Africa?
That's a very interesting question. I would say, and this is really interesting question. Because one, yes, part of it especially in the Sahara, is part of the matriarchal culture that existed in the Amazigh communities, where women had a lot of liberty and a lot of power, especially around the household. And women really were the educators. And this is in some aspects, it still exists. When children at a very young age, when they start learning the Quran, the people who educate them, women are the one who educate them, who teach them how to memorize the Quran before even they go to study ulum al-din, to study these other Islamic sciences like jurisprudence or the seerah or other anything. They study the Quran with their mothers or with their cousins or sisters, elder sisters. So women had that traditions that existed in pre-Islamic era that allowed them, when Islam came, to just to develop it and become really. But also, you also have to, but that role also diminished with the arrival of the Arabs, because in Arabia, Arabs, it's a patriarchal society, where women did not have a lot of freedom and a lot of agency. And Islam, when it came, even in Arabia, it was hard to eradicate these practices. It was very difficult, and Islam tried, the Prophet Muhammad, and tried really to get rid of those practices, because women in Arabia were even, if you have, if you're an Arabian father and you have a daughter, you kill it. That was the tradition, that was the practice, because of the idea of honor and shame. So that was, and the Islam, when it came, it kind of eradicated that. So that was, they stopped it. But again, the patriarchal practices remained. Some of it remained. And when the Arab moved to Africa, they brought with them some of those traditions that influenced the Berber, the Amazigh practice societies. But in other parts of sub-Saharan West Africa, women also were given the opportunities to receive education. We know, of course, about Nana Asma'u in Nigeria, in northern Nigeria, in the time of the Sokoto Khalifa, where she became a very famous scholar, a poet, produced a lot of literature. And we even in America today, you still you have the Yantaro. The Yantaro is going back to Nana Asma'u. It's a movement of women, really, about the education of women and promoting women's scholarship, women education, and women. So this tradition, yes, it existed, but it was really heavily, kind of influenced by Arabian practices, especially when the Arab came to the Sahara, kind of limited the agency that women had and the power that they had.
Thank you so much. And thank you again, Dr. Sesa, for that amazing lecture and presentation. We thank you so very much.
Caravans of Gold. Now we're going to do a matching activity. I was a middle school library media specialist for many years. And during my time there, I created these matching activities to introduce research topics to students. The matching, or sort of kind of like a game approach, helped the students listen and engage with topics that were new to them. They all wanted to get a perfect score. And so I tried to write the clues to make sure that they could. Just a way to kind of get them to listen and see what is available and possible for them to research. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a matching activity to introduce artifacts from Caravans of Gold. To do this, you're going to need to get a piece of paper and a pencil. So I give you a few seconds to grab something. Grab paper and a pencil. And you're going to number your paper from 1 to 11, as you see over to the right. Now, in the next slide, you're going to see photos of 11 artifacts from the Caravans of Gold exhibit. And you're going to listen as I read descriptions of these objects. On your numbered paper, you will write the number of the object I am describing. And I don't know if you might need to minimize your video box so that you can get a full view of the screen. Okay. We're going to do this first one together. Here's the clue. You ready? This is number 1. One of the oldest surviving textiles from West Africa is this woven telum blanket. Look to find the woven telum blanket. And it's number 9. So on your paper beside number 1, you will write 9. Okay, now we'll go on to the other clues. 2. Engravers in Sidi Massa, Morocco, began minting gold coins like this one in the 10th century. Can you find that gold coin? There's something else that's gold there that's close, but that's not it. And I'm not telling this answer. We'll talk about it later. Number 3. This 14th century circular gold pendant was found in a grave in Saint Louis, Senegal. Find the circular golden pendant, write the number beside number 3. Everybody for sure will get this one. We've already seen it. Number 4. Tuareg from Algeria fashioned this camel saddle. Number 5. This bead was unearthed in the city of Gao in Mali. Number 6. The learned scholar Ahmed Baba reportedly dictated this 16th century Arabic treatise to his student. An Arabic treatise. Number 7. This cap, made with cowrie shells, was excavated from a grave in northern Nigeria. Number 8. Potters in medieval Mali used local resources to make terracotta vases, like this one. Number 9. A 14th century artist in Italy used gold leaf from West Africa to decorate this painting of the crucifixion of Jesus. Number 10. This mounted horseman was excavated in Mali, in Bokoni, Mali. Number 11, the last one. A French artist used ivory from the tusk of a savanna elephant to make this statue of the Madonna and Child. And now for the answers. When I'm doing this in the class, we kind of go through them, and they yell out their answers, and we have a good time talking about the different topics that we're providing. So what we're going to do here, number 1, of course, number 9, is a fragment of a woven blanket from the Telem people in Mali. It dates back to the 15th century over here on the left. And they were found among burial remains in caves. And they're some of the oldest surviving textiles from West Africa. We always try to give students a present connect. So that's what we've done in this activity. You look over here to the right, here's our present connect, which is a Fulani tent panel, which comes from the mid-20th century. And one of the things that you may notice is that these weaving designs are similar. Classic weaving and design traditions are evident in this 20th century Fulbe tent from Mali. Number 2, the answer is 5. Engravers in Sidi Massa, Morocco began minting gold coins like this one in the 10th century. And as we've heard from Dr. Esesa, Sidi Massa was in fact a vital link in the African gold trade. And their mint began striking coins as early as the 10th century. And evidence strongly suggests that West African gold passed through the area as early as the 4th century. Okay, what's our present connect? Well, the names of early Moroccan rulers were often imprinted on gold coins. Now, this tradition of highlighting political leaders on coin is found, well, all over the world and can be seen on this commemorative coin of Mali's first president, Modibo Keita. Number 3 is number 8. This 14th century circular gold pendant was found in a grave in Saint-Louis, Senegal. The grave goods, which were, this pendant was found with other objects, and they were buried with a young man about 20 years old who was clearly of a high status to be wearing something so large and so beautiful in gold. If you look over here also, this ring comes from Senegal. And we can see that for centuries, Senegal has remained in dialogue with the past and, of course, more recently with the world. Their styles and designs embrace change, yet remain resolutely local and grounded in history and tradition. Number 4, the saddle that we saw before, the Tuareg saddle, number 4 from Algeria. And you'll see over here on the right, this is in rock art, and you'll see camels in the Saharan rock art. The present connect. You can see saddles similar to the one that we looked at today among contemporary Tuareg traveling the Sahara. And now Vanessa.
The answer to number 5 is number 2. This bead was unearthed in the city of Gao in Mali. And as you see, the picture on the left is a stone bead. Now, there are many sorts of beads that have been excavated in the region, and sites have relieved large quantities of colored glass beads that were made throughout the Mediterranean region, North Africa, as well as in the African forest. Our present connect on the right is our contemporary pieces of jewelry that are made and worn by Amazigh groups in Algeria and Morocco. The top picture is a pendant with coral beads that was made in Kabyle in Algeria. And the bottom picture is a Amazigh bride wearing necklaces and headdresses and bracelets using silver, coral, and amber beads. Number 6, the answer is 3. The learned scholar Ahmed Baba reportedly dictated this 16th century Arabic treatise to his student. This was a treatise on ethics, and the title was The Uttermost Hope in the Preference of Sincere Intention over Action, a treatise on ethics. He was a prolific scholar. More than 60 works are ascribed to him, mainly in the field of jurisprudence. Among these works is his much discussed fatwa on slavery, in which he rejects categorically the association of Blackness with unbelief and the corollary argument that Blacks are naturally enslavable bodies. The present connect is the Ahmed Baba Institute. If you see the picture on the right is the old building that was built somewhere in the 70s and 1970s. And the picture above is the newer building, the contemporary building, which is showing the library connections there on the left, and you can see staff offices at the top. And this building was built, I think it was at least opened in 2009, and the architect was a South African architect. And this Ahmed Baba Institute houses extensive resources for studying and preserving Timbuktu's famous manuscripts. Number 7, the answer to this is 11. This cap made with cowrie shells was excavated from a grave in northern Nigeria. And we took a picture here of the reconstruction drawing of the cowrie shell cap. This cap was excavated from very high status tombs at Dorbi Takusheyi, which is in the savannas of northern Nigeria. And these elite burials are remarkable for the concentration of materials that characterize trans-Saharan trade, which is metalwork from the Islamic clans, glass beads from far-ranging locales, cowrie shells from the Indian Ocean, and lots of other ornaments. Our present connect here is the group of Nawa musicians that are performing in a large square in Marrakesh in Morocco. And these cowrie adorned hats are among the material objects that are used to express the Nawa identity.
Number 8 is 10. Potters in medieval Mali used local resources to make terracotta vases, like this one here on the left, which dates back somewhere between the 10th and the 14th century. Now, what scholars have identified are the persistent patterns that have remained over time. Here's our present connect. This is a Dogon water jar. So persistent pottery designs that just follow over the centuries or are traced down through the centuries. Number 9 is number 6. A 14th century artist in Italy used gold leaf from West Africa to decorate this painting of the crucifixion of Christ. And there are scholars who have argued that the rise of the Italian gold coins in the 13th century can be correlated with this use of gold leaf on the panel paintings. So what they did, they took these coins and they would beat the coins until they were able to produce these thin sheets of gold leaf, which they would then use to decorate, illuminate paintings. And our present connect from the 20th century and a Baoulé artist from Côte d'Ivoire, the artisan of this contemporary comb used the gold, similar kind of gold leafing techniques that is centuries old. 10. This mounted horseman was excavated in Bankole, Mali. One of the things that would always surprise my students was the fact that there were horses, and they like to do projects about horses from medieval Mali. And the one that you saw, which was just one horseman, they believe came from a group because these were found with the horsemen, and they are portrayed wearing the accoutrements that reflect the wealth of the region, which was heavily involved in trans-Saharan exchange. The mounted horseman points to the importance of cavalry for expanding control and maintaining security. We read about this a lot particularly in Ghana, the first kingdom, and how they were able to defeat their neighbors and get power because they had horses. This one below, this equestrian figure is at the Museum of African Art. And it has both the horseman and the horse dressed, showing that perhaps this is a ceremonial military attire. At our present connect, the Durbar Festival is an annual festival which is celebrated in several cities in Nigeria. And there's so many pictures of these horsemen with their horses. They kind of coordinate their outfits with the horsemen that are on the internet. Your students will love to see these.
And number 11 is 7. A French artist used ivory from the tusk of a savanna elephant to make this statue of the Madonna and Child. Large-scale Virgin and Child statuettes represent the apogee of ivory carving in the Gothic period, and this sculpture is among the largest, measuring 16.5 centimeters in diameter at its widest point. It could only have been made from the tusk of a savanna elephant. During these times, tusks from savanna elephants were preferred because they were larger than tusks from elephants in other regions. And they were often transported in these camel caravans that Dr. Asesa was speaking of earlier. The present connect we have here is a picture of a herd of elephants at a waterhole in Penjari National Park, which is in northern Benin. And we have a quote there from a ranger that says, West African elephants are fairly aggressive by nature because they've been slaughtered in this region for centuries. Another particularity of West African elephants are their very small tusks, which goes against what we just learned. but they have smaller tusks since poaching has changed their genetic makeup. All those with big tusks have been killed. Now that's a very chilling byproduct of, not only trans-Saharan trade, but poaching that has continued well into contemporary times. Well, with these artifacts in mind, these are the 11 artifacts we just discussed, we will move on to our next activity. If this object could speak, what would it say? And our colleague Susan Douglas will guide you with instructions on what to do.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to share my screen here and bring this up. This has been very educational for me too, and we would like to now hand it off to create some breakout groups that will allow you to engage with the artifacts in the exhibit on your own. All of you have received in the chat the link to the teacher resource folder, and we will give you what you can do then is to go and open it. But first I want to introduce the activity generically. We have selected an activity where in your groups you can make this object speak. So it's a method of visual analysis. If this object could speak, what would it say? We have a number of activity sheets, however, that go a little bit deeper than this, but for the present purposes in this webinar with a lot of people, we have just chosen 4 questions. So when you get into your groups, you can choose a speaker from your breakout group to be the object in our debrief after you complete your activity for 10 or 15 minutes. The questions are, what makes me, the object, especially interesting or beautiful as an object in the exhibit? What technical skills were needed to produce me, which lets you really look into the, get inside the object and begin to imagine how it was made. What story do I have to tell about the life and times of the people who made and used me? And then, as they made the present connect, is there anything similar to me, this object, in your lives today? So we hope you'll really ham it up. And what I want to do is to give the directions. Each group will correspond. So if you'll see your breakout group will have group 1, group 2, group 3, and so on. And we will be making 11 groups. So you'll have about 7 or 8 people in each group. And your object that you'll be focusing on is numbered corresponding to the match activity. So we have this, this whole sheet prepared for you in the resource folder. I will put it into the group chat right now. So what you will have in these activities, in this sheet is a corresponding material from the exhibit that my colleagues have just gone into. So here is the link. I'm going to put it into our chat, and you can actually go to the resource folder and find that chat. Hold on 1 second, I have to get us to everyone. I've put it several times, but here it is. And this is also going to be the link that you will be able to go to and find all of the activities, including the PowerPoint and so on. So there's the link. Go to the link directly and open it up. And then as you go into your groups in a minute or two, you can open up that document and again go to the corresponding object to the number of your group 1 through 11. So we are breakout group 10. And have any of you been able to open up the document yet?
So the first question is, what makes it particularly interesting or beautiful? One thing I might bring up right away is just sort of the unity between the human figure and the animal figure. Mm. Like they seem sort of fused together.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting point. I might also add their together their uprightness is a very vertical.
Yeah.
And there's something quite statuesque about just how vertical the piece is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Although now that you say that, now when I look at it, I notice how the human figure's like leaning back so much, and the horse figure is like bending down so much. which sort of makes me feel, you know, like look at the difference in the heads.
Yeah, yeah, there is a distinction there, isn't there?
So that makes me revise my earlier thing and make me, you know, maybe like in terms of like torso and legs, there's some unity, but in terms of heads, they're really different to me. Like in terms of leaning back or not.
Yeah. Well, the way the human figure leans back, the way the animal figure leans down,
Right.
they're almost in mirror image of one another.
Yeah.
So there's a real symmetry.
Right. Right.
I also found myself wondering whether this terracotta was ever painted, whether it ever had any pigmentation,
right.
whether it was always monotone.
Right.
You know, and I don't know enough about terracotta art of the period and region to be able to say, but I certainly know that in many other cases, you know, medieval art that we now look at as monotone was actually painted in its earlier life.
Right. Right.
So that brings up an interesting question.
Right. Right, because that could make it the much more distinct from each other.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I can't resist unmuting myself. That was a really interesting
come on
comment. And especially when you look at the contemporary Connect image, they're so colorful. The quilted armor and the whole thing, it's hard to imagine even resisting making them colored.
Right.
It's true. It's true. You're right. It would almost take a feat of will to resist painting it.
Well, do you want to move on to the second question? Maybe what technical skills were needed to produce me?
Right.
My goodness. I mean, what technical skills are left out of creating sculpture, right?
Right.
Sort of like what technical skills weren't needed to produce this.
Well, right, and I can't look closely enough, but it looks to me like you would be sort of, I mean, you must have had very fine tools, right? To get the like bracelets around the wrist and stuff, as well as the sort of expression on the face.
Yeah. Yeah, you would have had to have very fine tools. I think that's absolutely correct. Especially the mouths. I think the mouths there's a lot of expression in the mouths.
Right.
Yeah.
And look at the man's arms. Like, look how, I mean, it's one thing for the horse, because the horse has kind of like blocky front legs, but look at the man's arms, like they feel fluid to me. And the fact, like, it almost looks like it should be wood or something as opposed to terracotta.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Well, Yeah, there is a fluidity there that's very much, it's very alive.
Right. I wonder if the man's neck, look at his neck, it's kind of thick with respect to like the arms and stuff. And I wonder if that's just a decision the artist makes, maybe both to show the dominance of the human figure, but also so the head doesn't fall off. You know, if you got too ambitious with that neck and then you end up with like a headless horseman kind of thing.
I'm going to share screen. I brought up a larger version of it.
Oh, okay.
Just now. So are you seeing that?
Yes. Oh, thank you.
So there we've got some better detail to look at in terms of the skill, the technical skill of it.
I'm wondering how we should read the circles, like the spherical parts.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean around the head, as well as the
like the torso?
Oh yeah, Okay.
And
I
then
see
you
this
kind of
kind
have
of
like the
medallion on the side over here. And
right.
then, yeah, do you mean that?
Well, I'm just I'm thinking more just on the human figure, like it's sort of at the neck, so maybe that looks like some kind of decorate. I guess it's sort of decorative elements. I'm just wondering about that one on the torso too.
Yeah. Also, I think with the image that you just brought up, Susan, we don't want to conflate the sculpture we have the biggest detail of in that image is not the largest one in the image we were originally looking at, the image to the right. So those are two different pieces.
Right.
And
I like ours better. I think ours is cooler.
Yeah, the helmet is really neat.
Like he looks like a real guy, right? Like
he does. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot more, like you said, fluidity.
Yeah.
In the tallest image on the right.
Yeah. And unlike the guy on the left, like he's not drowning in gear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, you feel a sort of body presence there, not just like a warrior who's being defined by his gear or his armor or something.
So maybe to the technical skills more, you know, I was thinking of either one of the mounted horsemen. It is not easy. If I were doing this in a ceramics class, that nag would become really sway back really fast, and probably the figure would collapse onto the floor.
Yeah.
So they're being able to model this and balance, like you see how the foot is connected in this one on the left. The foot is connected for stability to the front leg of the animal.
Right.
So it's a real balancing feat here, especially here with the longer one, that the taller one in the group. It seems to be a lot easier to make the ones that are in the more vertical than the mounted one is the most difficult one altogether.
Yeah, like you get to the point where it's the wrists and the hands and the sort of bracelets right above where the head is. Like that just looks like it must have been incredibly fine work.
And then the engraved patterns on. So Vanessa, what's our next question?
All right, hold on, let me get it. Our next question is, what story do I have to tell about the life and times of the people who made and used me? I mean, Brenda always says that, you know, how shocked people usually are at the fact that, you know, horses are used for these various, not only, you know, ceremonial, but for actual practical purposes, you know, during this time. So maybe something about the use of horse, and maybe then about the ornaments that are on the horses and on the humans.
Right.
I wonder if there's a...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go on.
Oh, no, I was just... You go.
I was going to say, I wonder if there's a certain spiritual element about the upturned head.
Yes.
You know, not only does it mirror the animal and sort of create a distinction, both a relationship and a distinction between the human and the animal.
Yes.
But the fact that the human's head is specifically turned upwards, even rather than straight on, could be saying something about the spiritual comportment of the creator and their community.
That's interesting too, because you know, when you're in a savanna and you're riding a horse, it would be so natural to look up to the sky and just feel the freedom of riding, you know, in this enormous flat landscape, you know, of savanna. So maybe that really expresses that kind of feeling that, like for us, you know, riding in a car, it gives us a certain sense of freedom with the top down if it's a convertible, and you know, and this is but the horse is like riding under you, and it's just really fluid experience of oneness with nature.
The fact that the horse is, I mean, the horse is stationary, right? Like its legs aren't like bent or anything. So that might even you know, you might be tempted, I'm just speculating, but almost a kind of contemplative spirituality, you know what I mean? Like a moment where you like pause and then you sort of just look up and you're kind of in this spiritual moment or in a moment kind of with your environment. It feels to me too like the figure's head is up but not looking at us, right? So that would almost support a more maybe spiritual interpretation as opposed to somebody looking right at us, like calling us to engage sort of as equals.
Yeah. And it could also speak, similarly, it could speak to temporal, to earthly political status of the figure as well.
Right.
There's a way in which this figure is above us,
Right.
whether that be spiritual or temporal.
Yeah.
And they would have been high status individuals that had horses.
Exactly.
Right. So connected.
And we could read some of the text there too to give us some ideas. Horsemen, a common theme, point to the importance of cavalry for territorial expansion and security. A breed of small horses was indigenous to the region, and larger Arabian horses were also imported across the Sahara. This group of figures relates stylistically to others that were excavated from mounds near Bamako, Mali's capital, where they had been intentionally buried. Expansion and security.
Right.
So he's a protector over the people.
A warrior.
Right.
Well, and that protection, that warrior status is also linked to Mali's economic power.
And that also kind of brings us to the present connect example, you know, how they dress up, you know, with this time with clothes that, you know, and what else? Let's see, where is it?
So here's the
colors.
Right. Look at those colors.
Festive, royal looking, a reverence for the animal. There's a lot going on there.
Right. I wonder if the relative simplicity of our sculpture has something to do with its presence in, you know, being buried with you know, in a burial mound, you know, that it's sort of, again, sort of going beyond the earthly in some way. I mean, there's definitely some things that you can see, but it doesn't seem like a heavily adorned body. Although I guess we see right there by the horse, you know, there's things right there in addition to what's on the human figure.
Yeah, and that's a real contrast with the other figure. The
Right.
figure was, you know, definitely tricked out in armor and all the equipment that would be in the picture, in the photograph. But this one is definitely more otherworldly.
And this other horse has such attitude compared to our horse.
Now, one thing that I can't make out very well are the nature of the engravings on the figure. From what I can tell from this vantage point, they're, you know, they seem they're decorative, but they're still pretty sparse. They're not as they seem to both speak to the fact that there should be that ideally there is more decoration, or at one point there would have been,
right,
but that it has been stripped down. So almost, you know, it's expressing a kind of royal or high political or warrior status, but also suggesting there's now a remove from sort of all the glory of that.
right.
So reading this thing, it seems like the use of the one on the left is more from this worldly, celebrating ancestors in some kind of shrine, whereas this one is grave goods, is buried. So it's definitely the more otherworldly,
spiritual,
right, like elegant. You know what it almost reminds me of? Like a minimalist, it almost reminds me of ballet, like the way that you would see a ballet dancer sort of pose and sort of just be having their body communicate something, you know, uplifting.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Very
So do we think that we're ready to have one of you folks portray this object as if you are it speaking?
And I would think also to remember the last question is there anything similar to me in your lives today? I think, I mean, the correlation to the ballet, I think that's a good one to have in mind. But in any case, you can choose any of these 4 questions to kind of focus on, or you can pick a few different aspects of what we just discussed, and you can do it in poetry form, or you can just have a couple of sentences, however you feel creatively inclined.
Right.
So do you want to represent us, or do you want me to do it?
I think you should do it. I
come on.
acquiesce to you.
All right, but can Cord, if you mind, if you chime in if I screw up.
You won't screw up, but I will chime in if I feel there's anything.
You can actually have a chorus because you have the different figures. You can have a sort of a chorus. Might be fun to do. You know,
that's true. That's true.
These guys are accompanying the horsemen into the other world. So,
I will say one thing too, just real quick about the comparison between these 2 figures. I can see the remnants of more pigment on the more worldly figure.
Yeah.
You can tell that there was paint there.
Yes.
The other
Definitely.
one, sure, maybe there was paint and it's all gone, but we can't really see much of any remnant of it.
Well, it was under the ground, so yeah.
Well,
and this one
right.
was, you can see the reddish, you can see the dark black. Yeah, definitely.
When we reconvene, will everybody be able to see both of these? Like, will they have this in front of them?
We can screen share when
Okay.
we do that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
well,
thank
you. This activity was developed, we've been working on this for quite a while, but it was developed, the idea of the object speaking, because students so often go to an exhibit and they just kind of feel overwhelmed by the art and don't kind of know what to say about it. And so getting inside the object, and then I found that when they come back and into the group, they just really hammed it up. So feel free to, to let yourself go.
No pressure.
No. It's all for fun,
Yeah, but thank you for sharing this exercise with us too. This will be really useful.
Fantastic.
And, my courses are, all literature, but I often do augment the literary with the visual, and this will be very helpful exercise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.